Hi everyone and welcome to Diabolical Misconduct. In today's episode we're going to look at 3 disturbing conversations with killers. There is video footage of conversations with Michelle Blair, Michael Bruce Ross and Dianne Downs. In this video there are details regarding child victims which some people may find upsetting. Viewer discretion is advised. On the 19th of May 1983, Dianne Downs was driving down a country road near Springfield, Oregon with her 3 children, 7-year-old Cheryl, 3-year-old Danny and 8-year-old Christy. The night took a dark turn when Dianne sped into an emergency department shouting for help and claiming that she and her 3 children had been shot by a carjacker. Shocked emergency staff rallied around the children who had been shot at point blank range in the back seat of the car, but sadly pronounced 7-year-old Cheryl dead on arrival. The surviving kids were rushed into the hospital with life-threatening injuries. Dianne told the investigators that as she drove with her sleeping children, a man flagged her down. She claimed he demanded she give him the car. However, when she refused, he reached into the car and shot all 3 children before turning the gun on Dianne, leaving her with a gunshot wound to her left arm. Hospital staff and investigators felt uneasy about Dianne's version of events and her lack of emotion immediately following the traumatic event. When Dianne's 6 children were fighting for their lives in hospital, police started to investigate Dianne, and Dianne began giving interviews to the media.
When this man shot my daughter, my first reaction was to snap back to my childhood, to the pain that had happened to me back then, my marriage, my entrapment by society. This man was bigger than me, he was stronger than me, he had more power because he had a gun. And I stood there and I looked at Christy reaching, and the blood that just kept gushing out of her mouth, what do you do? Everybody says you sure were lucky. Well, I don't feel very lucky. I couldn't tie my damn shoes for about 2 months. It is very painful. It is still painful. The scar is going to be there forever. I'm going to remember that night for the rest of my life, whether I want to or not. I don't think I was very lucky. I think my kids were lucky. If I had been shot the way they were, we all would have died. You can't replace children, but you can replace the effect that they give you. And they give me love. They give me satisfaction. They give me stability. They give me a reason to live and a reason to be happy. And that's gone. They took it from me. But children are so easy to conceive. At night, when I close my eyes, I can see Christy reaching her hand out to me while I'm driving, and the blood just keep coming out of her mouth. And that, maybe it'll fade too with time, but I don't think so. That haunts me the most.
During the police investigation, they obtained diaries that had been written by Dianne. Pages about her affair with a married man painted a picture of a woman obsessed with a man that didn't want children. This caused Dianne to see her children as the reason this man couldn't be with her. In actual fact, the man in question would later tell the police that Dianne was stalking him and had given him the impression she would be willing to kill his wife if it meant they could be together. He told of his relief when she finally left and he could rebuild his relationship with his wife. As evidence against Dianne began to stack up, her eldest daughter, Christy, was still in hospital having suffered a disabling stroke. However, she began to be able to communicate the events of the night she was shot. Her version of events were not the same as her mother's. This would eventually lead to the arrest of Downs the 28th of February 1984. Downs' trial began in May of the same year. Downs was pregnant at the time of her trial, however this made no impact on the jury. After Christy took the stand and explained how her mother had shot her and her siblings before shooting herself in the arm. On the 17th of June 1984, Downs was convicted of murder, attempted murder and criminal assault. During the time between verdict and sentencing, Downs gave birth to a baby girl who was removed from her and adopted by another family. She was given a new name and in adulthood contacted her mother, but states she regrets doing so, adding she regards her as a monster. Downs would later be sentenced to life in prison with an additional 50 years. She was ordered to serve 25 years before being considered for parole. The judge, however, made it very clear that he did not expect, nor did he intend for her to ever be released. Downs managed to escape from Oregon Women's Correctional Center on the 11th of July 1987. During the 10 days before she was recaptured, there was fear for the safety of the surviving children. Downs' surviving children, Danny and Christy, went on to be adopted by the lead prosecutor on the case. Danny is unfortunately permanently paralysed, and Christy was left with a speech impairment. Both have grown up and are reportedly leading happy lives despite the tragedy in their childhood. Downs has consistently claimed she is innocent, continuing to fabricate new versions of what she claimed occurred that night. She's been refused parole each time she has applied. Her last attempt was in 2010. She expected to attempt a 3rd time in 2021. She will be 65 years old. In June 1984, Michael Bruce Ross, a 25-year-old insurance agent, confessed to kidnapping, raping and taking the lives of 8 girls and young women aged between 14 and 25 in the years 1981 to 1984. Song Nok 2 was a 25-year-old university student. Ross raped and strangled her to death before disposing of her body in the waters of Fall Creek. Tammy Williams, 17 years old from Brooklyn, was sadly taken the 5th of January 1982. She was raped and strangled. Paula Pereira, 16 years old, known for hitching rides with strangers for a thrill, was picked up by Ross March 1982 on his way to Connecticut from Cornell University. He then raped and killed her by the roadside. Deborah Taylor was 23 years old from Griswold. On the 15th of June 1982, Ross kidnapped Deborah, raped and strangled her. Her remains were found 4 months later. Robin Stavinsky, 19 years old from Norwich, Connecticut, was raped and killed by Ross in November 1983. Her body was discovered under a pile of leaves in the grounds of the local hospital. On the 22nd of April 1984, 14-year-old Leslie Shelley and April Brunius were both killed by Ross. Only April was sexually assaulted. The girls were best friends, and during an interview with Ross in 1995, it would seem this event had a lasting effect on him. Take a look.
Well, I'm a serial killer. I've killed 8 women, 6 in this state and 2 in New York. I'm not a big serial killer, by the way. 8 people, that's nothing. There's a lot of other guys you can go see. They were dead as soon as I saw them, I think. I picked them up. They wanted me to drop them off at a gas station. I drove right by the gas station. Anyway, took them to a place, tied them up with some cloth that I had in the back seat. I put the younger girl, Leslie Shelley, into the trunk of the car, and I took the other girl, April Bernay, out, and I raped her and killed her, and I put her in the front seat. Well, the smallest one, Leslie Shelley, has always bothered me more than the others. I think it was because she was so small. I think it was because she was so cooperative, and I think it was because the way she was killed was so close to the fantasies. That was the one that was. It was like it was a fantasy.
Finally, Wendy Barry Booth, 17 years old, of Lisbon, Connecticut, was sadly raped and killed by Ross, and her body discarded inside a stone wall along the highway. Ross would later be convicted of the last 4 of these killings and eventually sentenced to death as a result. Ross was sentenced to death on July 6, 1987. He spent nearly 18 years on death row. For the first 17 years, Ross opposed his death penalty. In the final year, decided to waive his right to appeal. He wanted to spare the victims' families any more suffering. However, an hour before his execution was to be carried out on the 26th of January 2005, a stay of execution was obtained by Ross's solicitor on behalf of Ross's father. The execution was rescheduled a couple of days later on the 29th of January, but again this was postponed due to Ross's solicitor claiming Ross was not mentally competent in regards to waiving his appeals. The attorney claimed Ross had death row syndrome. Ross was finally executed by lethal injection on the 13th of May 2005 at Osborne Correctional Institution, Connecticut. He was 45 years old at the time of his death, and when asked if he would like to make a statement, he replied, "No, thank you." On the 24th of March 2015, 35-year-old mother of 4 Michelle Blair was visiting a neighbour when an eviction crew entered her home and started removing furniture. She had been evicted due to non-payment of rent. During the removal, the crew came upon a large white freezer in the living area of the home. They opened it and were in shock as they discovered the body of a teenage girl wrapped in plastic. The police were called, and when they arrived, a further tragic discovery was made. Directly underneath the teenage girl's body was the body of a young boy. Police apprehended Blair at a neighbour's home. 2 children were with her, and the other 2 apparently unaccounted for. She was then arrested for murder. The bodies of the 2 children were taken to a morgue for an autopsy to be performed. However, this would have to be delayed for 3 days, as that is how long it took for the bodies to thaw out. It was found that the bodies belonged to the missing kids, Stoney Blair and Stephen Berry. Their bodies had been in the freezer for approximately 3 years. 9-year-old Stephen sadly died in August of 2012, and 13-year-old Stoney 9 months later in 2013. It materialised that Blair had taken the children out of school after Stephen's death to avoid questions about his whereabouts. Both children had absentee fathers, and when neighbours asked about the children, Blair always seemed to have an excuse for their absence. The footage you're about to see is a conversation between Blair and the judge about how she killed her children. This is disturbing footage as Blair goes into detail about how she tortured and ultimately killed her children and why she says she did it. Take a look.
What did you do to Stoney Blair that makes you guilty of premeditated murder?
She raped my son. I intentionally killed her.
How did you do that?
From the beginning, when I found out about what Stoney was doing, It was 9 months later after finding out about Stephen. So for the whole 9 months we were in the house, she was still raping my child. I did not know that. When I first found out, I commended because I was not understanding he did that to him, but I repeatedly punched her. Many occasions, I told him to tell me every single thing she did to him. He was telling me more and more things that she did. I assaulted her every time. By assault, I mean I punched her, put a bag over her head till she lost consciousness. I threw hot water on her, scalding hot water from the faucet.
Did you hit her in the head with a wooden stick?
Yes, I hit her in her head multiple times.
Was that shortly before she died?
It was actually days before she died and the day she died.
Okay.
I hit on her back. I kicked her.
And you said you killed her by putting a grocery bag over her head?
Yes, and I do not feel any remorse for what I did to Stoney, because she had no remorse for what she did to my son.
Your Honor,
Go ahead.
can we ask Ms. Blair if she ever actually saw or witnessed any of these acts with regard to Stoney or
Okay, yeah. Did you ever actually see anything of any sexual abuse of any kind between either Stephen and Stoney?
I reject her question, but I will answer it because no one will say that this did not happen, because it actually did.
I just want to have a clear record. Because so far all you've told me was that you just heard it. Did you ever
And that
actually
they
see it?
admitted it. No, I did not. You get what I'm saying?
When she admitted these things to you, were you always being physical with her?
The first time, no. We were sitting there.
Okay.
She denied it constantly.
All right, tell me what happened with Stephen.
Basically the same thing. Can I ask you a question first? The people standing behind me, this woman who just asked the question, is she trying to make it seem like this did not happen?
No. We just have to have a clear record.
I understand people don't want to hear me, period, but I'm going to
I'm
take
here.
on
I'm listening to
everything.
you. Tell me what happened to Stephen.
My daughter, my oldest, met me at the door and she's like, Mom, come see what he's doing with his dials. He's making one dial, his little wrestle man, hump on top of the other. No, I'm like, why was you doing that? I said, anybody ever do this to you? He said, no. I said, then why are you doing that? And he said, yes, Stephen did. And I was like, and I went upstairs and I said, Stephen, you said you was humping on him. And then Stephen stood up and he looked at me, and right then I could tell something was wrong in his face. But I asked him, I said, Stephen, tell me the truth. Was you humping on? He said, yes, but that was all. So I started punching Stephen. And I put bags over Stephen's head because my son told me that the plastic on his bed, because I thought he was a bedwetter, he said, sometimes, Mom, I couldn't breathe. Stephen was laying on me and he had my face down and the plastic on the bed, I couldn't breathe. And he put the bags over his head. Lost consciousness. I did that a couple times. So I grabbed Stephen, I grabbed a belt and I put a belt around his neck and I lifted him up like, do you like how this feels, being choked with a belt? So I dropped him. I held him up until he lost consciousness as well.
You were intending to inflict serious physical harm, but not kill him.
Definitely.
Okay. Did you also punch him?
Yes, I did. Multiple
also kick
times.
him?
Yes, I did.
You also burned him.
Yes, I did.
Okay, how did you do that?
Hot water, scalding hot water. Yes, I threw hot water on him repeatedly.
Did that make him burn?
Yes, it did. His skin came off.
Did you
His
also
skin
make
came
him
off.
drink Windex?
Yes, I made that boy drink Windex.
He's in your custody?
I don't claim him as my son now, and I do not claim Stoney as my daughter. I have 2 children, that's it. Stephen and
time he
Stoney
died?
are demons, period.
What you did to Stephen was punishment for what Stephen did to you. That was punishment.
And if I had killed Stephen intentionally, I definitely would be proud to say I did. But I didn't. But I know all the things that I did to him, how I hurt him, I know it did cause his death.
Were you starving him at this time as
No,
well?
I never starved him. Now, Stoney, I did starve her. I did. Oatmeal is all that girl got. And she's lucky she got that once a day.
Stoney only got oatmeal? Is that what you're saying?
Oatmeal once a day. She's very lucky she got that.
Just so that I'm clear, you weren't allowing them to treat your other children like this, were you?
What do you mean?
You weren't allowing them to sexually assault.
I wasn't allowing that.
Right,
I never knew that should happen. right up under my nose. So, man, I don't regret none of this. I don't regret any of it. I don't feel no remorse for the death of them demons.
I would like to say that Blair's motive for her actions has never been substantiated. Instead, the surviving children have reported that she was the one physically abusing them, leaving them with permanent scars, mentally, physically and emotionally. The youngest child, a boy of 8 years old, stated that he was aware of the murders and where the bodies were stored. He said he witnessed the death of his sister. Blair's 17-year-old daughter also claimed to have known about the deaths of her brother and sister, adding that Blair forced her to put her 13-year-old sister's body in the freezer on top of her brother. In July 2015, after pleading guilty to torturing and murdering the children, Michelle Blair was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Blair's parental rights for her surviving children were terminated in July 2015, and 2 years later it was reported that both were doing well after having therapy and going back to school. The youngest of the two was eventually adopted, although it is unknown by who.